Russia's invasion of Ukraine has taken a new turn this week, with President Vladimir Putin announcing a mobilization involving the deployment of 300,000 conscript troops to Ukraine's front lines. The order came with a stark threat of nuclear warfare that has left global leaders outraged. For more on what Putin's announcement says about the progress of his special military operation, we're going to bring in former Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters shortly. But first, we're joined by Otago University International Relations expert Professor Robert Patman. Good morning, Professor Patman. As always, it is so good to have you with us.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to be so blunt, but is Putin delusional to think that unprepared citizens, albeit with previous military experience, because that's part of the criteria, right, will help win a war that Putin's professional troops are losing?
Well, that's a very good question, because that's the point that's occurring to many of us. But Mr. Putin has few good options left. He's had very high casualties. He's lost a lot of equipment in this so-called special military operation. And he needs to be showing, not least to the people around him, that he means business about consolidating the territorial gains that he's made so far. And therefore, he has to bring up more bodies to defend the territory which he's annexed in the eastern part of the country. And this means bringing up 300,000 reservists. But as you quite rightly point out, that can't be done immediately. And these people are less well trained than the previous people, and up to 50,000 of them unfortunately perished. So it's a very tough situation. So I think that there's a degree of trying to respond to a situation. I mean, the mobilization, the partial mobilization, is all about putting people into places which are under threat from a successful Ukrainian counter-offensive. They've got about a 1,000-kilometre line to defend, Jenny May. So that's the situation at the moment, I think.
Yeah, you said 50,000 Russian troops have perished during this special operation. Close to that, right? Although the Russian's defence minister has put the number at a very specific 5,397, which is clearly a lie, right? So calling up the reservists, is this a sign of desperation then that Russia is losing this war on the front line?
Well, I think that announcement is a signal that the invasion is not working out as planned. And it's also, as we've seen, unleashing serious pressures within Russia, because many Russians seem to be relatively relaxed about this special military operation when it didn't involve this sort of mobilization. But now we're getting people called into the action who probably felt they could view it from a sort of armchair position, and now they realize it's coming home. And there was protests across 25 cities in Russia in the last 48 hours. And there's lots of people trying to leave the country, as the media are picking up on. So I think one observer said that Russia has been in a state of zombification since the war began. And maybe there are some cracks now. And I think Mr. Putin's authority is under serious question.
Yeah, passive observers, I think, or passive participants in this war, Russian citizens, I think I've heard it described as well. Can you explain this to me? Because I think this is quite ridiculous, but you're the expert. Russia and its allies in Ukraine are planning a referendum in 4 separate regions. Russia doesn't even have full control of those 4 regions. I think maybe they have some control in 2 of them. So explain to me what that is about. What is the end game there?
Well, the end game is to try to come up with some sort of legitimization of territory that's been annexed since a special, let's not call it a special operation, it's an invasion, since the invasion. And he's trying to legitimize annexation. It won't wash. It'll be very difficult to have a fair and free referendum in the circumstances, the war conditions. And quite frankly, it's also an attempt to consolidate annexation by saying that these 4 areas where the referendums are going to be held, are now part of Russian mainland, which in a sense enables Mr. Putin, if he wants to escalate and say that Ukraine is now attacking the mainland of Russia. Of course, most people will not accept that interpretation outside the Kremlin.
Professor Patman, I do want to bring former Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters into this, but can I ask you about the nuclear weapons threats that Putin also spoke about. How serious should the West be taking this?
I think we have to take it seriously, but we should not panic. And what I mean by that is this is not the first time that Mr. Putin's engaged in nuclear saber rattling. He did it on the very first day, 24th of February, when he launched this invasion. He said anybody helping Ukraine could be subject to Russia's ultimate weapon, or words to that effect. He has stepped up the rhetoric, but what he's trying to do actually is take advantage of liberal democracies and put pressure on Western actors which are supporting Ukraine. In other words, he wants Western countries to say, oh, if we continue to support Ukraine, we run the risk of nuclear war. That's what he's trying to do. So basically, his message to the world is, you either accept my territorial gains in Ukraine or you run the risk of nuclear war. Well, of course, that's a false choice. And it's probably up to the Russians to decide whether they want a leader acting in their name, take them into that sort of scenario.
Look, final question, and I'm hoping you can do this for me in about 30 seconds, but our Foreign Affairs Minister, Nanaia Mahuta, has said all options are on the table, including expelling the Russian ambassador from New Zealand. What do you think New Zealand should be doing?
I think New Zealand ideally should be acting with other countries in actively considering expelling the Russian ambassador. Why I say that is because this is a message not just for the Russian government, which won't take too much notice, but it's for the Russian people. It's important that small and middle powers indicate their systematic disapproval of what Russia has done. Russia has ripped up the UN Charter, and it's very important that New Zealand makes a stand on this, and expelling the ambassador is part of that.
Professor Robert Patman, Otago University International Relations expert, always a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for your time this morning.